I'm going to put you on the spot here, Martin, because you're such a bold thinker. So if you were named tomorrow Czar of the world, what's one thing we could do to gain common sense? So,
well, it's funny because I'm writing an op-ed in the New York Times about that very topic. And what I'm saying is, let's install a Ministry of Common Sense in the new administration, because in the end of the day, what I think is happening is that bureaucracy has become so complex that we just can't see the forest for just trees. And in fact, I want to be inspired by another country. So the Republic of Georgia, which is a very small country based in Europe, in the eastern part of Europe, in fact, installed or have set up these type of community centers across the country in almost every city across the whole region. And there you can go in and do everything in 30 minutes, supposedly. So you can, if you want to be married, 30 minutes. If you want to be divorced, 30 minutes. If you want to have a new car license, 30 minutes. If you want to set up a new company, 30 minutes. Whatever you say, 30 minutes. And it works. It works. This is the place. Now, that is common sense for me. And I would say there's the best thing you can do is in our life is to reduce frictions on your day-to-day basis, because that is causing a lot of pain. It gives people diseases. We go down with stress, we get anxiety. So the first thing I'll do probably would be to set up a Ministry of Common Sense in the new administration in the United States. I think that will then inspire a lot of companies and countries around the world. Another thing I'll do is what's happening in Denmark, which is Northern Europe. And in this
country, correct.
It is my native. Well done. Yeah. There's 6 million people. It's where Hans Christian Andersen came from. And there is something rotten going on in the state of is also from there. And that's where you have Lego. Of course, I know your son loves Lego. So that's
my son was, yes, as a young man, as a boy. He's now all grown up.
But what they've done in Denmark now is that they have started up classes in the public school for the toddlers, which is teaching them about empathy. And this is another very profound insight, because empathy is like a muscle. If you train it, you get it more. If you don't use it, it disappears. And if you don't build it in from the very childhood, the ability to hug people, which we don't do anymore, to be close proximity with people, to listen, actually, we don't do that anymore, and to react on based on what we're learning. If we don't build it in from childhood memories, if we instead are just following the brainwashing going on from the Facebooks of the world, telling you the whole world is about you, then I think what's going to happen is that we actually are ending up in a situation where it will disappear. And we talked about that early on, then we'll lose that skill set. So that would be the second action, to building classes around the world, teaching and training the concept of empathy.
Great.
So around, I want you to give me an idea of how they come across to their staff. Are they really making good decisions? And what in those interviews, what I've discovered is that if a woman, typically the body language we talked about earlier, she's typically nodding her head, that might mean to her, I'm listening to you, I'm acknowledging what you're saying.
Right.
But many times a man will think that means that you're just agreeing, you have no thoughts of your own, you can't make a decision. And that was the case for this big Fortune 10 company. And they were about to dismiss a woman because she said she doesn't speak up, and she nods her head and goes along with whatever's happening. So I think 3 things that women can do to communicate that they are confident and confidence is pay attention to their body language that we've already talked about, a body language of confidence, to embrace conflict, and to be sure to speak up when you disagree. Sometimes they'll walk out of a meeting thinking I've disagreed, but they'll write the email saying I disagree with what we've just decided there, rather than speak it. And I think being able to speak it is much more important.
Right. It's one thing you mentioned, and I think women are far better at it, and it shows up on video. And I often encourage people just to watch this kind of stuff. Is I think women are much more attentive in listening than men.
Yes.
So that's how can women turn that into a virtue?
Well, women can be standing at maybe in the lobby and there's a big holiday party going on, or any kind of cocktail party before a client meeting. And she's nodding her head, listening to this guy, and she's thinking, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I can't wait till I escape,
Right.
But women are very good at listening. They can repeat an entire conversation. Now, of course, I do that as a writer because I'm paying attention to detail, but just in general, women are very attentive with their body language. They can read between the lines. They read body language. So again, the research bears that out. And I think they need to take advantage of that by using those other things that they pick up in a conversation just by that attentive listening.
And I think women are much more consensual in the sense of acknowledging where ideas came from, whereas men may be less
at
so.
Their best.
What's so reassuring about this is that A, leadership is accessible, and B, we've heard this cliche, but you have the research now to back it up. Leadership is not a title. So.
It is a set of skills and behaviors. It's actions.
Great. You said, what's the most surprising research that you found in this book? Is it the fact that where we draw our leadership inspiration, or are there other things you want to share with us?
I would say that one of the surprises, it may not be a surprise as much as it is a reassurance, that the consistency in the data. And as I just said, when we take a look at the roles people play, whether it's a managerial role in the workplace or whether it's a community member outside of work who is just a colleague, a peer, the extent to which you demonstrate exemplary practices, positive leadership, is consistent across all those groups. And so it's the consistency of data that's most impressive. In other words, when we first discovered this in our research, these practices, and we found that the more you, for example, model the way for others, and the more you inspire a shared vision, the more likely it is you'll have engaged constituents. And we found that, and we reported on 1987, our first book, we continue to find it today. So it's consistent. We're getting feedback that's consistent.
And then we've had many conversations with colleagues about the tragedies of this year, George Floyd and so many other things, it's an inflection point. It's on top of mind. How do we sustain change? How do we make it real? So,
I'd like to say, being the Chief Learning and Diversity Officer is a perfect combination of two of my passions, right? So I am, learning is my superpower. I think you can learn your way through anything. When we talk about diversity, you're really talking about representation, taking a really hard look around and saying, is my organization, my community, my, insert place I am analyzing really representative in a way that I want it to be? But it's also a learning choice. And, there's a quote that I love: diversity is a fact. It's happening in the world. Whether or not you choose to, acknowledge it or not, it's a diverse world. People have different experiences, different walks of life, but inclusion is a choice.
Yes.
It requires you to humbly determine, what can I learn about people who have different lived experiences than myself? How can I, as a leader or manager, make choices to make sure that people feel belonging, that I'm bringing in different perspectives across the table? And so it is a constant intentional focus on creating an inclusive environment and teaching every member of the community to choose to be inclusive and to choose to learn and to choose to engage.
That's great. We've been, quote, having classes in diversity forever. Do we teach inclusion? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I think anything that you want to get better at, you have to learn. You have to commit to learning. And so, if you are a manager and you realize you have a very diverse or geographically dispersed organization, then what are the tools that you can use in order to make sure that you're intentionally creating an inclusive environment? So I think you teach inclusion just like you teach anything else.
Great. Now it brings us to your fundamental concept of joy. Okay. How do you define joy, and what the heck does it have to do with business?
Yeah, great question. For me, joy is derived, is certainly in a business context, but I believe in other parts of our lives as well, from serving others to the point of delighting them. Mm-hmm. That's where we derive joy as Menlo, that the work we do when it gets out into the world and delights the people we intended to serve with the work that is often years in the making.
Yeah.
And when they come back to us and say, I love what you guys built. You made my life better because of this. Everything we've done to construct the company, all the practices, all the thinking, all the systems, the way we recruit and hire and promote, everything is focused on delivering that kind of joy to the world. So for me, joy is externally focused. Now, is there joy in the room too? Of course there is. I don't think you can produce joy in the world without having joy in the room as well. You know,
yeah.
In a pejorative sense, how do you address that? What do you, how do you counsel young women about this?
So I love this topic, John, and I'm actually thrilled that we had the chance to write about it recently, especially in this kind of political campaign era. I've been actually dealing with this as a woman leader and a woman executive for the better part of 25 years, but it hasn't been until recently that with my deeper understanding of the bias that I've been able to make sense of it. So just very precisely, unlike men, women who aspire to leadership experience what we call this double bind. So we are either filled with kind of the feminine stereotype of being likable, so soft or kind or collaborative, or we're kind of filled with the male stereotype of assertiveness, so tough, competitive, and brave. Unfortunately, based on this bias, it's one or the other, but not both.
That's interesting. We've had on this show a couple of experts in fear in the sense of both special forces, one from the Navy SEAL, former, and another a Royal Marine. Oh, wow. So they talk about the management of fear. So what do you say about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And certainly those trained Navy SEALs, and they know you have to train in order to manage your fear. And the first part of that training is really about awareness. So starting with the fact that we're mostly in fear most of the time, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being called out as being an imposter, letting people knock us down, right? If we want to manage fear, we have to recognize it. So I personally cheat. I use alarm clocks. We happen to carry one around with us all day. So when you think about your alarm, the alarm that you might set in the morning, right, to wake up. Most of us, if they set an alarm at a regular time every single day, you start to wake up a few minutes before that alarm goes off because you've trained your brain to become conscious at that particular time. We can use that same strategy to train ourselves to become conscious while we're already awake. So it's kind of pulling ourselves out of this subconscious space where we might get locked into fear. So I use that alarm clock just sort of jolt me out into my awareness and say, what am I afraid of right now? And when I have that opportunity to think about it, to process it consciously and cognitively, I can decide one of two things. Either that's a real threat and I should be afraid of that tiger that's coming at me, or it's a threat, but what can I learn from it? Right? If this fear is actually realized, this is a great opportunity for me to grow and to practice that growth. So
you said it's a good point, and it dovetails into this last point I want to touch on. And this is where humility really plays the game, especially from when we tend to be a little full of ourselves. And that's humility helps us to be open to views different from our own.
Yeah. Well, this is, yes. I mean, in a sense, it's straightforward, but I like to be right, just like the next person, maybe even more than the next person. I don't know, but I have been wrong many times. I've probably been wrong 5 times today that I don't even know about yet. And then just learning that although I'm a big believer in the value of the individual and in the uniqueness of every human being, I mean, there's nobody like you in the whole planet, literally. And so that's critical. And I have studied and written about creativity to learn about that too. And it's clear, the idea comes from the individual. but the wisdom of the group can enhance the idea of the individual. And so all of our thoughts can be elaborated on and made better when we're around good people.
Right.
And everybody's got a good idea. And I just would suggest most organizations, as you already know and teach your clients, I mean, most organizations are missing out on 95% of the intellectual capital that they're paying for because they're not having conversations with people on the front lines. They're sitting in a small circle of upper level people who, with all due respect to those of us who are in that smaller circle, we still don't know what it's like to really be on the front line. And so having those conversations, not as a trick to engage people, because this is commonly how I get asked about it. Like, I want people to feel more engaged. And I'm like, why don't you just engage them? It's not a trick. Like, just sit down and ask. And I've come to say, like, just, okay, like, do you have conversations with your business partner or the upper level leadership team? Well, yeah, of course. So, well, here you go. Take exactly the same questions and go ask the new delivery driver the same questions. Because although they might be scared for the first 90 seconds, they have the same kind of thoughts that you and I do. And I don't know what I'm doing, and they don't know either. But we have a chance, A, at the least, they're going to be treated with dignity, back to your earlier point. B, they start to realize their thoughts matter in the organization. And C, it's highly likely they actually have some good insight that I wouldn't have thought of.